Well, it's good to be with you this evening. And the introduction was correct. This is kind of my home union. I practiced in Ardmore, Oklahoma for 26 years before taking the call to Weimar University. It was not an easy decision. Our feet were in concrete in Oklahoma. We had just signed on the bottom line to purchase a new clinic that was much larger in a prominent location on the busiest street just 3 days before I got the call to come to Weimar University. And of course, the Lord had to put a lot of things together, including that if He wanted me to go, that the people I just signed on the bottom line would let me get out of that without any expense. And they actually did, along with a whole lot of other things that lined up that made us realize that the Lord was actually calling us to the sacrificial labor of Weimar University. Well, I was asked to speak about this topic, nutrition versus prescription, the truth about mental health treatments. And I'd like to start out with a quote from Testimonies to the Church. This was volumes that Ellen White actually desired that every church member, as well as the neighbors of church members, she said, even give these books to your neighbors, that she wanted them to read. That's why it's called Testimonies for the Church. And in volume 3, she says, it is the nicest and most critical work ever given to mortals to deal with minds. And this is what I have the privilege of dealing with on a daily basis at Weimar University, and for the many patients who come there to have their minds fixed. The mental illness is at an all-time high. It's in epidemic proportions. She goes on, those who engage in this work should have what? Clear discernment and good powers of discrimination. This is why we have started a master's program. We do have a bachelor's in psychology, but we have a master's in counseling and wellness. You don't often see those two together. But they actually go together quite well in regards to helping minds to heal. At another place, she says, 9 out of 10 diseases from which mankind suffer have their origin in the mind. So the mind is a great reason to really pay attention here today. Now, we are seeing all mental illnesses rise significantly, but depression has also risen significantly. There are over 100 symptoms of depression, but 9 diagnostic hallmark symptoms. Deep sadness or emptiness. Women tend to notice the sadness more because they'll get maybe crying spells. Men don't notice that as often, and so they often deny that they're depressed. They might feel empty, but they don't realize that's one of the diagnostic hallmark symptoms as well. Another symptom is apathy. This is when you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the day. You get up out of a sense of duty and responsibility, but not interest. That can happen to anyone once in a while, but when it happens the majority of the time, that is distinctly abnormal. And amazingly, studies done on young people under the age of 25, particularly from the ages of 12 to 25, the majority of our younger people are waking up not interested in the day. They are not excited about another day in their life. And they can also start feelings of hopelessness as well. Third symptom, more irritable than you used to be. We are in a generation that has lower frustration tolerance than any previous generation recorded in the United States of America. We have individuals that get triggered by just a phrase, maybe something that's true out of the Bible, and they'll get triggered and irritable upon hearing that truth. We have people that are polarized and are at each other in regards to difference of philosophies, etc. Low frustration tolerance. We see this in road rage. Did you know you're actually more likely to die from the effects of road rage than any other forms of accident outside of alcohol or inebriation? So road rage can actually take your life. A lot of accidents. What is road rage? It's low frustration tolerance, is what it is. It's not that big a deal that that person just cut you off. But for someone with low frustration tolerance, it's a huge deal. And they feel like they need to even beat up the person and punish them. Increase or decrease in weight or appetite. We are seeing marked rates of obesity, but we'll never solve the obesity epidemic until we solve the mental health issues behind the obesity. And many people are self-medicating their mental health issues with food. What type of food do they tend to self-medicate with? Recently, there was a study done on the 5 most addictive foods to Americans. Anyone want to guess what was in the top 5? Now, this is talking about foods, not beverages. There are addictive beverages as well. That's another study. What would be in the top 5? All right, number 5, ice cream. I won't ask for a show of hands on how many of you have addictive relationships to these things. Number 4, cookies. Number 3, chips. Number 2, chocolate. What's number 1? Number 1, cheese pizza. Cheese has even hydromorphones in it. It has some opioids that are quite addictive. What do those foods have in common? Yeah, I mean, they're obviously addictive, but salt, fat, sugar. At least most of them have that sugar. When you put those 3 things together, you have an addictive food, and you have people that, interestingly, those foods, particularly when they have the carbs in them, they can actually make you feel less depressed. Not only taste good, you actually feel a little better, but then there's a nadir that occurs, and then there's a downward in the mood, and so you have a tendency to repeat it. So we have people in our depression and anxiety recovery program that come that are quite overweight, and we also have, notice it's also a symptom if you are underweight or if you have a decrease in appetite. Depression can actually take away some individuals' appetite. And the underweight people will all gain weight, and the overweight people will all lose weight in the same program, because we're dealing with the underlying issues that are causing it. Sleep disturbance. What's the most common sleep disturbance with anxiety and depression? Insomnia is pretty common. Your head hits pillow and your mind keeps going. But it's not the most common. Sleeping too much, that can happen as well. We had a woman come to our program not long ago. She was sleeping 20 hours a day, barely awake long enough. In fact, out of the 4 hours she was awake, 3 out of those 4 hours, she was in bed directing her family from her bed. So she was barely out of bed long enough to be able to survive and stay clean enough to live. And that's fairly common as well. There's a lot of depressed people who just want to sleep all the time. But it's not the most common. The most common is what we call middle insomnia. This is where you're able to go to sleep, but then you wake up too early and can't get back to sleep. And the more severe the depression, the earlier you wake up. Decrease in focus and concentration. This is also at an all-time high. You start reading something, you get to the bottom of the page, you realize you forgot what was at the top of the page, and you have to start again. And colleges and universities throughout the nation are seeing people that they admitted with high ACT scores and high school GPAs, and they're not performing in college. They're not performing in college because of this decrease in focus and concentration. And by the way, if we can't focus and concentrate, it's usually because we have a problem with the anterior cingulate gyrus of our frontal lobe. And this is the area of the frontal lobe that begins to shrink as a result of getting distracted. And distractions are at an all-time high. Why are they at an all-time high? It has to do with the smartphones. Interesting statistic. Every country in the world where half of the citizens own a smartphone, rates of depression and anxiety and suicide skyrocket in that country. That happened in 2012 in America, and exponential rates of depression, anxiety, suicide. The economy was going up, and even suicide rates continued to go up. I was in Kenya. I'd been in Kenya before, and Kenya's a happy country. They don't have much money, but they were all happy. And, you know, they didn't even have to walk miles to get water. It didn't seem to bother them at all. Frustration tolerance was very good. And they could, you know, get along quite well with a lot of difficulties in life. But in 2019, it began to change. Suicide rates went up, depression went up, and even the national newspaper put out a big thing. Shock, rates of depression and suicide rising in Kenya due to smartphone usage. Half of the country owned a smartphone by 2019. By the way, have these technology companies gotten any consequences? I can tell you if there was a drug that was released on society that dramatically increased suicide rates and depression and anxiety, we would have gone after that pharmaceutical company, and rightly so, for their greed and all of those sorts of things. The technology companies largely are not held responsible. I did hear that about 2 weeks ago, maybe for the first time, they were held responsible for what they were doing for those under the age of 18. But there's still been no consequences for those over the age of 18. Most of you are over the age of 18, and I could probably predict that most of your brains have actually been adversely affected just by the normal use of screens. Let me explain it. Studies show when a college student sits down, this is an adult, college student sits down to do their homework online, within 3 minutes, they're no longer doing their homework. Within how long? They meant to get the homework done. But what happened? They got distracted. And the engineers know that this kid likes BMW, so there's a little BMW floating across the screen within 3 minutes. And it says the new A20 is now at your local dealer, and the kid's thinking, wow, I knew it was coming out, but not this soon. Let me just click on this and see what this A20 is all about. And as he's reading all about the A20 and seeing the engineers take it for a spin, then all of a sudden a news flash notification comes out and says, the president of the country just got handcuffed and put in a New York City jail. Oh, I've got to see that. And so they click on the news flash and they see what the left says about it, what the right says about it. And then a friend sends them a Snapchat. And if they don't see that Snapchat, then they're not going to see what their friend was up to. And so they look at that Snapchat. And then pretty soon, there's another communication coming in. Now an hour has passed. And this kid is now starting to think, why did I get on my screen to begin with? Oh, yeah. My homework. That division of attention starts pruning down the anterior cingulate gyrus. And the anterior cingulate gyrus is not only for your working memory. By the way, studies showed that academically in this country, this is the first generation in school that is doing worse than their parents' generation. We thought technology was going to improve education. They're actually doing worse. They're not learning. Even I got the head of our accreditation liaison, who's our natural science department head. She's at a conference right now, an educational conference for all universities in California. And she sent me this slide showing that when students use AI to write their papers, within 7 minutes, they cannot even remember the section that they copied and pasted from AI to be in their paper. They don't even understand their paper. And they just kind of, this is not education. This is, well, I think you get the idea. But decrease in focus and concentration. The connection is that when you have a decrease in focus and concentration, you're no longer able to manage distressing emotions, because that's the same area of the brain. So if you can't focus and pay attention, you will not be able to manage distressing emotions. And this is why we have emotional intelligence at an all-time low among our citizens today. By the way, can that frontal lobe come back in the anterior cingulate gyrus? It can. It takes 6 weeks of an electronic fast before it starts, though. And it'll be very significant. And so when people come to our program, we not only give them an electronic fast, we actually teach them how to use a smartphone smartly. And some people can't learn how to do that. And if you don't know how to do that, you should trade in your smartphone for a dumb phone, and you will end up being a lot smarter. Fatigue. This is where you are losing energy. People are their energy level tends to run out very quickly, or they don't have a lot of energy. And then when feelings of worthlessness come about, you can be assured that this is on the severe side of things. We have many people come to our program that have feelings of worthlessness, and they will feel that their families would be better off without them, and they might even feel that they might be better off dead. That's when morbid thoughts occur. And this also tells us that irrational thoughts are part of mental illness. Basically, if we were to look at mental illness has to do with what percentage of your thoughts are irrational and unhelpful. And if you can have completely rational, truthful, and helpful thoughts throughout the day, you are going to be mentally well. And you're going to be able to do a lot of positive things and help your community. Now, you don't have to have all 9 of those. I did 9. Only 5, and you have major depression. If you have 2 to 4 of those symptoms, you have minor depression, still considered abnormal. It's only normal if you have 0 or 1 of those symptoms, as long as those symptoms are not the last 2 there. Those last 2 are always abnormal. But also what's going up is anxiety. Anxiety is based on excessive fear or worry. Obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder. Social phobia is at an all-time high. We have students from many different universities that come to our program, and they will actually go to their university cafeteria, get the food, and go back and eat in their room. They don't want to be seen in public, and they don't want to have to socialize because they have social phobia. Many of them have what's called social appearance anxiety. What is that? That is when, in fact, I'm sure there are some people here, some people that are watching online that may not be living too far away from here because they had social appearance anxiety. Social appearance anxiety is the belief that you will be judged negatively just on the basis of your appearance. And so you do not want to appear. You have that social appearance anxiety. And of course, the social media has driven this because the picture of your friend that just got posted on the internet that looks amazing, you're realizing that you can't measure up to the appearance of that individual. But you don't realize that individual took 1,000 pictures of themselves in different settings and different lightings until they found the one that looked least like them, and then posted it up to the internet, and they can't match up at all to that either. And so we have this very false image world. There's a reason why the second commandment had to do with not worshiping images. And studies show the more images we look at, the more irrational and unhelpful our thoughts become. And so this is part of what's driving social phobia. This is why Australia has taken the measure. I didn't actually confirm it, but it came from a pretty reliable source, that Australia has now banned social media in anyone under the age of 18. Not just 12, they banned it in those under the age of 18. This is going to result in some healthy things if they're able to keep that law. Panic disorder is an anxiety disorder, and then there's a host of physical symptoms. Even COVID, you're much more likely to die from COVID if you had anxiety as much as if you had obesity. So if you are not obese and you are anxious, it gets rid of viral immunity, and you're not able to recover very well from infections. Cancer is more likely. Just to show you how much mental illness has increased, this was a study done on 16 to 24-year-old girls who were self-harming. Self-harming used to be rare, not anymore. 1993, 1% of girls between the ages of 16 and 24 cut or self-harm. By 2000, it had gone up to 2%. 2007, 4%. You would think, well, exponentially going up. 2014 is 8%. 2014, remember what happened between those 2 years? I just mentioned it, 26%. And every 7 years they've measured it, but in 2021 they decided not to because there was 2 epidemics going on. There was the one the media was focusing in on, which was the COVID pandemic, but there was a mental illness pandemic, and it probably would have been even skyrocketing that much more. Well, depression would be bad enough if it just did those symptoms, but unfortunately, it does a lot of worse things. It can cause tension and migraine headaches. It thins your bones. 5 times as likely to abuse drugs or alcohol. Increased risk of developing asthma. Increased stress hormones. That's going to age your brain quicker. That means you're going to end up with dementia and Alzheimer's, far more likely if you don't get your depression taken care of. It not only affects you, it affects your offspring. They have more mental illness and physical medical problems if they're raised by someone with depression. And it also increases the risk of suicide. I think we have become too, what should I say? I think we have believed that suicide is just one of those inevitable things. Suicide has gone up every year in this country, as mentioned, but I don't think we realize how many suicides. Did you know there are 17 times more suicidal deaths every year in this country than the deaths that occurred from the terrorist attacks of 9/11? We're still talking about those terrorist attacks and those deaths that occurred in 9/11, but 17 times more of those deaths are occurring every year in this country due to people taking their own life. This is not something that's acceptable. We need to start changing some things. And we need to start looking at all of the different causes of mental illness that are skyrocketing and address them in our society. The World Health Organization now states it's the #1 cause of disability worldwide. People are more likely to lose work due to depression in their productive years of life than even back pain, even pneumonia or colds or infections or heart disease. You add up any of those diseases, and depression is the #1 cause of disability. And it even does things like decrease your risk of bladder control, decreases sex hormones, decreases memory, and of course, decreases emotional intelligence and social pressures. The anxiety burden, we mentioned the immune system, increased risk of cancer, and of course suicide goes up, self-mutilation goes up. Often the anxiety pain is so severe that they want to detract to physical pain. That's why they're cutting themselves, because they believe the physical pain is less painful than the emotional pain that they're suffering from. And then it sets up for an addiction and an increased risk of addiction, increased risk of death from physical diseases, and even greater risk of death from non-physical diseases, and social, relational, and emotional intelligence complications. If we don't take care of depression and anxiety, studies have shown that this will take more of a toll on your longevity than if you're a lifelong cigarette smoker without mental illness. So this is significant. We used to, in our church, hold a lot of plans for 5-day stop smoking plans. How much more of humanity could we reach if we actually start addressing the mental illness in our churches and in our society? And then the cost is pretty astronomical. This shows lower incomes throughout life, lower educational attainment, fewer days working each year, fewer weeks of work per year, loss of at least 20% in lifetime income. And if you have a family member with depression and they don't have it taken care of, it will cost $300,000 in its effects throughout the lifetime. But yet, people are not wanting to get comprehensive solutions because it might cost a little. This could be the best investment in their life in regards to this cost. In fact, someone took a look at just the results of our community program in improvement in depression and anxiety, and they said if the country would go through nationally the community depression and anxiety recovery program, the national debt would be solved in this country without raising taxes and without decreasing services. Why is that? Because if you have your depression taken care of, you can now work, and you're now able to pay taxes, and you're not siphoning from the government. And so it can make a huge difference. But yet mental illness still is being treated, unfortunately, despite the evidence, still being treated in ways that the traditional methods have shown are very minimal as far as its positive effects. So let's talk about the number one treatment. The number one treatment today, if you were to go to a doctor and they're to diagnose you with anxiety and depression, is going to be a pharmaceutical. This is the number one class of pharmaceutical sold now in America. They're flying off every pharmacy shelf in large numbers. And the most common pharmaceutical is called an SSRI. Now, if you take a look at the graph or the diagram there on the left, this is normal function. So when the electrical transmission goes through that neuron, and that little serotonin is released from the vesicle, it is bound on to the receptor, and notice that third receptor in. Another electrical transmission occurs, and when that occurs, it's released from the receptor, and it's vacuumed back up so that it can be used again. Notice all those serotonin right next to that vacuum cleaner. That's called the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And that serotonin molecule is now going to be able to be reused. Why? It takes over 1 million ATP molecules to make one of those serotonins, and so the body wants to be able to preserve that energy and use it again. But the drug that the doctor just prescribed does not cause you to make more serotonin. It doesn't help you build up any more receptors. What it does is it blocks that reuptake channel. So notice that SSRI comes in, it has that big tail, it plugs the vacuum cleaner of the releasing neuron, and now notice how much more serotonin you have in the synapse there because it can't get back. But that's a short-term gain and a long-term problem, because now you've just shorted the neuron of the very substance that you're trying to treat. And this is why the doctor doesn't tell you, take this and you'll have your problem solved. He says, take this and come back and see me again. because he knows if it does work, eventually it's going to quit working and you're going to need more and more medicine. And how much does it work? This is Nature magazine, one of the 5 most prestigious peer-reviewed journals, doing a review of depression recently, and it said in a study conducted in real clinical settings, a common antidepressant produced a response in just under half of the participants and achieved full remission in only what? 28%. By the way, they state there, if you were to read the whole article, that those 28% that went into remission always had other things that they were doing too to help their depression. It wasn't just the pharmaceutical approach. 5 decades of work on antidepressant drugs have not made them more likely to lift people out of depression. Medications and psychotherapies help some people with the disease, but what do they say? Fail many others. In fact, Dr. Whitaker has shown that when antidepressants are released on a community, the rates of depression and anxiety actually go up in that community. So these medicines were never meant to be lifetime medicines. They were never meant to be used long-term. They were meant to be a patch until we found the underlying problem as to why there's not enough receptors or why there's not enough serotonin produced. Now, when I started the residential program, we actually started in this union at the Lifestyle Center of America there in Sulphur, Oklahoma. How many of you are old enough to have gone to an ASI union event at the Lifestyle Center of America? Okay, we see our president of the ASI raising her hand and her husband. I don't know that I saw any others. Were there any other hands that I missed? Okay, yeah, there's a few hands. Yes, okay. Yes, Brother Courtney was there too, I remember. And at the Lifestyle Center of America is where we started our residential program. And when we started the residential program, I actually did not think it was going to work that quickly, because in an outpatient setting, normally it takes a month before we start seeing results of depression and anxiety. So I told the Lifestyle Center, anyone who wants to sign up for this program, tell them they'll be no better in 18 days. But if they stay on it, they will eventually get better. Well, there were 28 people that trusted us, even though I said they wouldn't be any better. There were 27 females and 1 male that signed up for that first program. And we noticed that when we used everything together, they were getting better quickly. 10 days, 80% of them were getting better. The brain can heal very quickly once the underlying issues are solved as to why that brain is having struggles. But what I was doing then was actually considered alternative medicine. Now, when a doctor hears the term alternative medicine, what goes through their mind? Well, yeah, it might be quackery. Maybe they'll be respectful enough not to call it quackery, but they will believe that it's non-scientific medicine. In other words, if the scientific medicine doesn't work, then, you're desperate enough, go ahead and try things that are unproven and non-scientific. Now, one of the reasons why they were saying that what I was doing was alternative medicine is because there were not randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials. Let me go back to this diagram here. There's a lot more serotonin in the synapse. That vacuum cleaner is plugged, but as a result, there's unwanted side effects. Even if you get a response, you will develop an I don't care attitude rather very quickly. Some people like this with depression, because if they don't care, they don't cry. So it's like, okay, at least I'm not crying. It's okay that I don't care. But when happy things happen, you don't actually feel happy. You actually feel very flat. It also worsens impulsivity. Impulsivity is very bad when you increase that and you have a person thinking that they would be better off dead. And so every one of these pharmaceutical agents has a black box warning on them saying if you give this to a patient, they might actually increase their risk of suicide. And it actually has been shown. A lot of suicides, they just started taking medicine in the last month. And it also causes sexual side effects, but they're fine with the sexual side effects as long as their depression or anxiety can get better. So they're putting up with all of this. And so the point is that when you give a foreign agent to someone, there better be a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial, because you have to look at the positive effects, but also the negative effects. And this is why you have to go to a doctor to get this, because the doctor is supposed to help you to weigh all the negative effects against the positive effects to see if in your case, it might be better that you take the drug or not take the drug. But when that came down as the gold standard, which it should be the gold standard for foreign pharmaceutical agents, they started to say that this should be applied for natural things. And so when a study came out showing that physical exercise helps depression and anxiety, becoming physically fit, actually the evidence shows that if you become physically fit, it actually helps your brain more than it helps your body. You can measure the fitness in your body, but the brain actually improves even more. But most doctors that they diagnose depression and anxiety, they'll give them a pharmaceutical agent, but they won't tell them to exercise. Why don't they tell them to exercise? There's no double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled trial that shows that exercise works. But they haven't necessarily thought it through. In order to do a double-blinded study, you actually have to fool a person into thinking that they're exercising when they're not exercising. Tell me what placebo you can give a patient to make them think that they're out there exercising and they're not exercising. So it's actually impossible to even do that trial. Blueberries. Blueberries are a great antioxidant. Antioxidants have been shown to decrease the rate of neurotransmitter decline. They can help depression and anxiety significantly, but they'll call blueberries alternative medicine because you can't give a placebo that looks like a blueberry, tastes like a blueberry, and has all the texture of a blueberry that is not a blueberry, and so you can't do the double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. So what we were doing, despite the evidence that it was highly effective, was actually called alternative medicine. Now, after Nature magazine came out with its report on depression, by the way, their report stated we need to go back to the drawing board. Depression is rapidly increasing and what we're doing is not working very well, and please have someone go back to the drawing board in regards to how this should be treated. We published our HIT hypothesis, identifying over 100 causes of depression and or anxiety. We categorized into 10 categories and found if 4 or more of these 10 categories are active, depression or anxiety disorder most often results. And the more categories involved, the more severe the depression and anxiety tends to be. Finding the cause and eliminating the reversible causes can effectively help in treating depression. Now, one of the categories that we talk about is a genetic category. Depression and anxiety tend to run in families due to the genetics. And if you have a mutated gene, by the way, genetics is never the sole cause. Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. But if you have a mutated gene and you have a nutrition and lifestyle factor that's not ideal, that gene will be expressed and you can end up with not being able to even form the neurotransmitters in the brain appropriately. And so you can get a serotonin shortage, you can get a dopamine shortage, you can get another shortage. And so, interestingly, this article was just published last year, comparative efficacy and tolerability of, what does it say? Nutraceuticals for depressive disorder, a systemic review and network meta-analysis. Notice it's published by a peer-reviewed journal, Psychological Medicine. It's actually published by Cambridge. You can see when it was accepted for publication. It was published last summer. This is the abstract from the study, showing now 192 trials involving 17,437 patients and 44 nutraceuticals. Now, first of all, let me break that down for you. The typical antidepressant gets released on the market with 400 patients taking it. This is not 400, it's 17,000. And these are actually double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials. How were they able to do a double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial in a nutraceutical? They took the active ingredient in blueberries that helps the brain, put it in a capsule, and then once they put it in a capsule, they now can have another capsule that looks exactly the same, and now it can be double-blinded. The patient doesn't know if they're actually getting it, or the doctor doesn't know if they're getting it, but now they can break it down and take a look at what this is showing. And it actually showed that when we use a nutraceutical with an antidepressant, it's far better than taking an antidepressant itself. But it also showed that there were 4, see if I can show it for you that have very good eyes here. Notice this, 4 nutraceutical monotherapies. That means they just used the nutraceutical, the natural therapy, demonstrated superior efficacy to antidepressant therapy. And the superior efficacy was actually, we weren't surprised to hear it, but it actually comes from this plant, one of those 4. Does anyone know what that is? The red stem is the active ingredient of saffron. And now there have been a number of randomized controlled trials showing that saffron and S-adenosylmethionine, those were 2 out of the 4, are actually far superior than taking any antidepressant. And side effects, see if I can show you this, go back to the article here. Nutraceuticals showed comparable tolerability to placebo. In other words, they're not actually decreasing your impulsivity. They're not making you more apathetic. Their side effect profile is great, no sexual side effects. And so as a result of this and other studies, I'm running out of time. I wish I could share with you a lot more, but I will be here more this weekend. This is what a review article said even 10 years ago. Now they're saying more than this. Diet is as important to psychiatry as it is to cardiology, gastroenterology, and endocrinology. Endocrinology is diabetes. We know diet has a lot to do with diabetes, has a lot to do with cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, gastroenterology, fiber. But they say diet is as important to psychiatry. In fact, this is a psychiatric journal written by psychiatrists. Nutritional medicine should now be considered as a what? Mainstream element of psychiatric practice. In fact, this is also a quote from the review article. Now is the time for the recognition of the importance of what? Nutrition and nutrient supplementation in psychiatry. So now, what we're doing is actually considered, even by the experts, as the true scientific medicine, and the pharmaceuticals are now considered the alternative medicine. I didn't know if I would live long enough until that switch occurred, but it's already occurred. But I can tell you the typical psychiatrist is not aware that it has occurred. Why are they not aware? Their journals are publishing it. The scientific evidence is out there. But when a new pharmaceutical gets released on the market, there's a nice-looking pharmaceutical representative coming to that psychiatrist's office and the family doctor's office and the internal medicine doctor's office and the pediatrician and the obstetrician and gynecologist. These are the ones that are seeing these frontline patients, and they're explaining how this drug is to be utilized, and they're explaining what to watch out for and educating them all how to do it. But when a new study comes out showing that saffron is superior to antidepressants, there's no good-looking saffron representative coming to that psychiatrist or that primary care doctor's office. Why isn't there? Because you can't patent saffron. You can't patent blueberries. You can't patent physical exercise. You can't patent a whole lot of things that are, anything that is in nature. If you try to patent it, the US government's going to wisely send you a letter saying it's already in nature. But the point is, what is already in nature, when we use it wisely, it can be far superior to the old-fashioned scientific medicine that was considered the gold standard of medication. Do you get an idea why we started a counseling degree on not only counseling, but wellness? You don't necessarily need to see a doctor to get prescribed saffron. You don't need to see a doctor to get on an exercise program. But your counselor can help you with the counseling, but also help you with getting on these natural things. Notice this statement from the pen of Ellen White. Natural means, used in accordance with God's will, bring about what? Supernatural results. We see this every month at Depression and Anxiety Recovery. People that came with hopelessness, who've been in psych wards, who've been seeing mental health providers for years, and someone finally has told them about the program at Weimar, and they come thinking that no program's going to help them because they've been through it. And in 10 days, the positive neuroplasticity switches have already dramatically started to change that brain. And not only is the biochemistry improved, but their thought patterns, because it's not just a biochemical approach. The biochemical approach is very important, but I've had to tell people. In fact, let me just share this part of things. You get an idea of the comprehensive approach and how much better it is. But let me just mention one of the ways of making serotonin is tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid. You can see some of the foods that are higher in it. And then there's ratios of getting more tryptophan into the brain. Let's see. Yeah, okay, here it is. Tryptophan is the least abundant amino acid in the diet. You need it to make serotonin, melatonin, which will help you sleep better, and niacin. And notice the conversion of tryptophan to 5-HTP, which is the step needed before it goes into serotonin, is inhibited by stress. So if you're not handling stress well, you're actually going to make less serotonin. We've had people come to our program that say, Dr. Nedley, you're the biochemical expert. I don't know what to do for my brain. I don't know what I need. And I've tried all these things and it's not working. My problems are real. I don't need to go to counseling. Because they feel it's just a biochemical problem. But here's the thing. If we perfect the biochemistry and we don't get rid of the irrational, unhelpful thoughts, those LA freeways in the brain are still there. And so it has to be a combination. We have to build their frustration tolerance. We actually teach them a song on the first night there. I don't like it, I don't like it, it's okay, I can stand it anyway, I can stand it anyway, I'm all right, I'm all right. It's very important we teach that before they go into their first hydrotherapy session. Because the hydrotherapist will explain to them, and this is good research, that the cold has to be uncomfortably cold in order for the brain to have that positive effect. Not dangerously cold. No one's ever died. We've never had to send anyone to the hospital after hydrotherapy. It is uncomfortably cold. And as they experience those heat shock proteins afterwards, and their mood starts to improve, and their brain circulation starts to improve, just by tolerating the cold, their frustration tolerance goes up, and they're able to start making more serotonin. But notice what the rest of the phrase says. Insulin resistance. Half of Americans have insulin resistance. We'll actually measure that in their bloodstream. If they're insulin resistant, how do we take care of insulin resistance? Someone's demonstrating it in the back there. Physical exercise. Physical exercise will help your insulin resistance. So this is why we have individuals also exercise. They'll actually get more tryptophan into their brain. They'll be able to make more serotonin as a result of their exercise. It could be a magnesium deficiency, a B6 deficiency. It could be lack of light. Light actually through the eyes helps us to make serotonin, particularly the blue light in the morning or the blue sky light. And so there's a combination of approaches that can do dramatic things. And when we just get on a medicine, that's only addressing one aspect of it. And we're only going to get a partial response. In order to get a complete response, we have to completely put the patient on a comprehensive program. And we will figure it out. Within 1 week of them there, we will know precisely what they need to do to have their brain entirely fixed. And what a blessing and what hope that brings. And of course, what better feelings, and it increases their emotional intelligence and productivity as well. So, once again, we're amazed. By the way, I should quote one other thing too before getting off the stage. This is actually a randomized controlled trial on diet. There's only one diet in a randomized controlled trial. Now, you can't do double-blinded in regards to the diet, but you can do randomized controlled trials. And you can have other aspects in regards to sham treatment. So it's not that we can't do randomized control, we just can't do randomized double-blinded control. But this was a randomized controlled trial. There's been a lot of different randomized controlled trials showing that a plant-based diet significantly will improve your depression and anxiety scores within 2 weeks, down by a whole clinical response in both men and women. And you know, one of the reasons why I mention this, and there's a lot of reasons, the scientific literature is full of them, the antioxidants, the no cholesterol, the no arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid pours fuel on the fire of inflammation. So it's an anti-inflammatory diet. It's basic and not acidic. But I've seen a lot of people, even those in our own faith and churches, that are getting very confused by some false science out there in regards to diet. And they'll think they need to be on a keto diet where it's 100% meat and eggs in order for them to get better, et cetera. Yes, ketosis can be helpful, but actually the studies show, let me put this one here, consuming meals at 7 a.m. and 1 p.m., not surprisingly, that's when we serve our depression and anxiety recovery patients meals, is associated with favorable cardiometabolic parameters compared to meals at noon and 6 p.m., delayed eating, including reductions in body weight, insulin resistance, fasting glucose, total cholesterol, and adiposity. Ketogenesis actually occurs through intermittent fasting. And that intermittent fasting, the benefits carry over into the non-fasting period. So we don't have to be on a high meat diet in order to have ketosis. We just need to not eat suppers in the evening. And we can have those benefits of ketosis. It improves glucose regulation, increased stress resistance, improves mental performance and physical performance. And so this leads up to what I was going to mention here. Genesis chapter 1. God said, "Behold, I have given you every," what? "Plant, yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food." Ellen White, in commenting on this, says, "By precept and example, make it plain that the food which God gave Adam in his sinless state is the best for man's use as he seeks to, what? Regain that sinless state." The reason for the health message was not so that we could live longer, although that's a great side benefit. The reason for the health message was so that we could have emotionally intelligent brains that could tolerate frustrations, that could still be sharp despite being under stress, that could have energy despite the threats to brain energy that are all around us. God gave us the health message for our brains primarily, because also the frontal lobe of the brain is that spiritual center of the brain. And this is why diet is not just a side option. God put it in Genesis chapter 1, and he includes it all the way to the end of the Bible as well. Daniel, of course, we know how prominent it was for him as well. And what we put into our bodies, God is interested in. Whatsoever ye what? You eat and drink, do all what? To the glory of God. And God realizes this is best for us. It's not that he wants us to live a lesser life or a life that's not full of joy. This is the diet that can give us far more joy. And the studies are very clear on it, even in controlled randomized trials. So I think we need to trust God, trust what he has put in his word, trust what's in the spirit of prophecy, and true science is indicating that God's methods are not alternative medicine. That is now the true scientific and it should be mainstream medicine. If your primary care doctor or psychiatrist is not talking to you about nutrition, when you're coming to him for mental health issues, he is not mainstream. He is old school. And that's according to the psychiatric journals themselves. He is old school. And so he needs to start learning and expanding his toolbox into things that will have far better results and far less side effects. Let's pray before we close. Father in heaven, we thank you that we can trust you in even our healing of disease. We thank you that you have shown through us, through the Bible and inspiration, ways in which we can preserve our health as well as to get it back when it's challenged. And we thank you that your methods are now being shown as the true scientific methods. Not that we're smarter than other people in finding out these methods, but you will bless those that trust in you fully. May we learn to live by your rules of health and not our own. In Jesus' name we pray.